When I had satisfied myself that no star of that kind had ever shone before, I was led into such perplexity by the unbelievability of the thing that I began to doubt the faith of my own eyes.
Il podcast interplanetario. L'esplorazione dello spazio a beneficio di tutta l'umanità. I tuoi ospiti in Inghilterra e nei Paesi Bassi. Matthew Russell e Julio Apre.
Oh yeah, baby, Tycho Brahe, who was born on this day.
Hey, Matt.
Hi Julio.
How's it going?
We got Julio back. Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Lonely time.
Yeah. It's been a bit busy here on European space transportation and rockets.
Yeah, looks like you've had an interesting time.
Yeah.
Go on, tell me a little bit about Tycho Brahe. It's his birthday. Born on today.
Exactly today. He was born in 1546. We're quoting this today on his discovery of object SN 1572, also known as Tycho's supernova. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, well, yes, supernova 1572. So in 1572, he saw it. Brighter than Jupiter, almost as bright as Venus. So it caused a stir all around the world. The reason why Tycho gets kind of the credit is because he wrote most about it in his book, De Nova e Nullius Avi Memoria Prius Visa Stea, which is concerning the star, new and never before seen in the life of memory of anyone.
And up to then, there was this belief that just stars did not change, right?
Yeah, Aristotle was the one that said, no, the heavens are just fixed. It's a fixed realm of stars.
So with this you can start assuming that stars have a life, beginning and an end, and that they also move through time. Again, completely change our image of ourselves in the universe. Just like Copernicus taken us away from the center of the universe and the solar system, now we also see that the solar system is not even in the center of anything.
This is a kind of period in astronomy that's very similar to the period that we're living through now, I think. Like Tycho Brahe, obviously mates with Kepler, is following in Copernicus's kind of wake as well. This is the time of Queen Elizabeth I. Which is a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? That it's both Elizabeths on the throne here in England when all this is happening. ESA have got the Gaia mission, haven't they? And didn't that release some data last week about moving stars?
Well, ESA's Gaia is like this big satellite to map and measure as many stars as possible in our skies. I'm definitely not a scientist, and I have not work directly on this mission, but I can tell you that last week they released a new set of data called Early Data Release 3. And with this new release, now Gaia has measured more than 1.8 billion sky positions that could refer to stars or other objects and their brightness values. And also it measures about the distances to about 1.5 billion stars. The Gaia mission was such a game changer. It really, in a few days of operation, gathered more data than what had been done over decades on other measurements.
That's known as astrometry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's at the end of the day, this is what helps you navigate in space. Because in space, you don't have GPS, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? This supernova really was the start of everyone thinking, crikey, we really better take seriously creating star catalogues. And because a lot of the time, our sort of superhero of the week is always a star cataloguer. And you realise just how important it actually is to have started to unpick the jigsaw puzzle that is space.
Yes, and just like in those days, they used the stars to navigate the seas. These days, we need those catalogs of stars to navigate space with our spaceships.
We should say, actually, that you can see the pictures of Tycho Brahe's or Tycho's supernova. Chandra and Hubble, their combined pictures of SN 1572, I think are amongst the most beautiful objects that we have pictures of in the universe. I think it's actually amazing.
Yeah, it's a stunning photo.
It's so colourful.
And you're seeing the remnants of a supernova. It's really impressive.
You can map the movement of that gas that sort of spreads over light years. It's actually incredible.
On a completely different topic, putting the brakes and turning you in direction of our planet now. These past few weeks have been quite active for many different startups and not so much startups. Lots of movement in terms of money and contracts. Where should we start?
I guess if we start really close at home, because obviously Jamie and I visited Orbx. So if you want some more details about Orbx, because we actually interviewed Chris Lamore way back on podcast 120. And Orbx are a kind of British, UK small satellite launcher trying to launch primarily out of this Sutherland spaceport in Scotland. And they've won a whole bunch of fundings, 24 million, mainly from venture capitalists, but also from the European Union, European Commission, Horizons 2020 fund. So yes, Orbx is, for those that don't know, let's a quick recap is that Orbx Prime is their rocket and it's going to run on camping gas, which is quite funny. Biopropane is what it's actually running on, and that's supposed to cut CO2 emissions by 90%. Not quite as much as the space elevator from last week, but it's pretty good. It's supposed to be reusable, but we actually, Chris Lamore talked to us about reusability on the podcast, but he's yet to reveal how they're going to do it. But they are going to do it, not by parachute or helicopter like the Electron. That's looking really, really good for Orbx. If they've got more money and they've got more people talking about them, so that's pretty encouraging stuff. So they expect to launch in 2022. Even Chris Lamore himself commented that space launches always go behind schedule a little bit. So yes, the funding comes $2.5 million or euros of that comes from the European Horizon 2020 program, which is a European Commission thing, and it's the first UK space sector company ever to receive that money from the European Commission. So that's pretty exciting. This is now a race they are actually not the only micro launcher company that got some funding this week. Last Wednesday you had ESAR or ISAR. Which one? I don't know which one it is. Aerospace. Let's go with ISAR to avoid.
Let's go with
to avoid confusion.
Let's go with ISAR Aerospace that raised 75 million euros, which is about $90 million.
Yep.
And this is the biggest funding round by a European space technology startup ever.
Wow.
Mostly as well from private investors.
Their rocket's called the Spectrum, is that right?
That is correct, Matt. Funny enough, the ISAR, Aerospace, Rocket Factory Augsburg, and High Impulse are three German micro-launcher companies that we have recently here ESA signed contracts with under our ESA Boost program. In this program, we are trying to... pun intended, boost these commercial initiatives for all these companies that are trying to offer space transportation, not so much the micro launcher itself, but the services. We are trying to boost them to be able to provide these services in the market.
It's Eric Berger pointed this out, didn't he? That actually there really is a race for the European micro launcher market. So there's Skyroarer are in there as well. And of course, Lockheed Martin and perhaps Electron, if Lockheed Martin isn't the Electron bid, which I've still not quite grasped whether that's
there seems
which
to be
way round it is.
There seems to be a race for micro launchers worldwide because you have activity. Yeah. You have activity in China. You have lots of activity in the US, obviously, with Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit. Okay, there are many others that I don't want to list now. But if you see statements from, let's say, big bosses from the different established industry companies, they always claim that they see space in this ecosystem for one, maybe two viable micro launcher businesses worldwide. So it's really a race, and well, we have to wait and see.
Crikey. Well, yeah, over in New Zealand is a really interesting one, I thought. So that's Dawn Aerospace have been licensed to fly their space plane. So that's the New Zealand Civil Aviation Authority have granted Dawn Aerospace and their Aurora Mark II the ability to take off from normal airports to deliver payloads to space, which seems it's a strange concept. That concept of like a plane taking off from a runway right the way up. I suppose it's a bit like the Virgin Orbit space plane, but it seems to be a slightly different concept.
Well, you guys in the UK had forever Skylon as well as another type of horizontal takeoff.
Skylon seems to have been a long forgotten thing by reaction engines. They don't really talk about it much anymore.
No, now they're mostly based on their engine, the Sabre.
Yeah, and they're pre-coolers, aren't they?
Yeah.
But talking of space planes, here's one that's close to you, isn't there? The good old
Space Rider.
What episode was my interview with Giorgio Tomino?
I don't remember. I think it was number 58.
Indeed, correct.
You know, the Space Rider. Space Rider always makes me think of the Silver Surfer.
Yeah,
of Marvel Comics.
It's not quite as good a name as Dream Chaser, the Dream Chaser. I keep calling it Dreamweaver, the Dream Chaser, Space Rider.
But Dream Chaser it's Dream Chaser. Okay, it's bigger, and in one of its iterations, it's designed with humans, with the crew in mind. Space Rider is smaller. It's going to launch on Vega C, and it's uncrewed. It's mostly for cargo. But what happened this week is that we actually signed the contract. We signed the contract with a bunch of companies that will provide what we call the space segment and the ground segment. So the whole system to take it all the way to flight. These companies were Thales Alenia Space and Avio, both in Italy, and also Telespazio and Altec, all Italian. And then... now this really means that now we have all the funding to make Space Rider a reality and bring it all the way to fly in I think 2023.
You say it's small, but it's the size of 2 minivans and can contain up to 800 kilograms of payloads. And of course, the great thing is it flies back to either Kourou or the Azores, and you can get your scientific experiment and get your hands on it straight away rather than having to wait for someone to fish it out the ocean, right?
Well, that is one of the main points of Space Rider, the fact that you can recover your experiment, and then that you can refly. You could even refly your experiment on Space Rider. Okay, so you can get your experiment back, tweak it, get the data you need, and instead of rebuilding a payload or experiment all the way from scratch, you can reuse it inside of the same vehicle. Why not? That is it for Space Rider. But
it's not it for space planes, though, is it? Because we should see a Virgin Galactic space plane attempting its first suborbital space trip from Spaceport America, which was supposed to be big news, but there's going to be no crowds because of COVID, of course. It's a bit of a space plane week, or certainly a sort of small trip to space, maybe suborbital week. I don't know, but the big one of the week, we can't go by without talking about perhaps one of the most exciting space events of the year, if not of all time.
Do I have to prepare my drink?
I think you definitely have to prepare your drink for this one.
Tell me, what did Elon do this week?
Drink.
What
did he do? What didn't he do? Well, first of all, one of my favourite pictures of the week was Elon standing next to Starship SN8, serial number 8. He was standing next to that, not Supernova 8, although it kind of did explode. If that's a bit of a spoiler there, but that picture of him standing next to the big old SN8 was absolute beauty, and kind of brought that kind of whole scale to the whole thing. But the flight the flight, has to be said, was nothing short of amazing. What's annoying, what's really frustrating, is how the press seem to have got it completely wrong. They're just sort of more about the Elon Musk Starship explodes on test flight, and it's like, no, that's kind of missing the point.
Doesn't that
it does.
That is probably gets you a few more clicks, and this is how it seems to work these days, right? Like the big flashy title.
One of the newspapers went with the headline, "There was no crew on board."
Jesus.
It's like, no shit. So yeah,
that reminds me of that TV host in the UK that asked Tim Peake about his trip to the moon.
Amanda
Remember
Holden.
that?
Classic, an absolute classic of embarrassment.
Well.
But that moment is one of Tim Peake's finest hours. The fact that he's got that training to completely contain himself in that situation. I thought he dealt with it so unbelievably well, because it's like you kind of want to go, oh duh, yeah. But he doesn't. He's quite nice to her.
Yeah. But okay, let's go back to
sorry, yes, Starship. So we should sort of just quickly go through the whole thing, because it was amazing, wasn't it?
I have to say, I watched it a few times because you can see a lot in it. Okay,
that's the beauty, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole dance in the gimbaling of the different engines as one shuts down and gives space to the other two to get center, and the other one gets out of the way. That's just beautiful. And also on the way down, right before the spoiler that you mentioned before, you can see actually a change in the color of the flame. That gives you a hint of the mixed ratio of the oxidizer and the fuel itself. It's very it's just spectacular what they do, and I look forward on what they do next.
Yeah, I mean we've got SN9 to look forward to. I mean that the whole. The gimbling of the rocket engines I thought was incredible, because when I was first watching it, because obviously I'm not a rocket engineer, I was thinking, gosh, the sort of forces that the Raptor is going under look so violent. When they switch off, it looks like the whole thing kind of recoils and bashes around. But that wasn't recoil, was it? It was the gimbling to kind of cope with the change of thrust vectoring, I suppose. And it was just like they get that they can move so fast. I just didn't realize that all that sort of gimbling is like incredibly fast, isn't it? It's like it's amazing. But
you have to be fast. You have to be fast at those speeds. Yeah.
And I just loved when it was going in for that, as it belly flopped. I thought that the sort of belly flop maneuver where the fins are actually working for the first time, and you could see this enormous, like whatever, how many story building it is falling down. You know,
I made me think of a whale in space.
Yeah, it was,
or a flying whale in a way.
It did look like the pictures of the space shuttle. Big orange booster as it came down, to be honest, and it was like it's sort of coming down, but it's under control. It's kind of going away from. It's also they got a bit of sidewards motion on it, so it takes it away from crashing down on all the important buildings. But it's falling down, and then it flips. It does the flip maneuver, and everything looks perfect. You think, wow, that the header tanks have worked. So the header tanks are there because obviously the fuel is sloshed around in the fuel tanks now, so you can't get the fuel into the engines properly. So they have these additional tanks, which mean you can fire the engines for this final burn after being sideways for however many minutes it was. And all that worked, and they looked like two little fingers, didn't they? Or two like kind of blue legs pointing out the bottom of the booster. And just at the last second, it turned to this sort of bright green. Now, the explanation I've had, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Julio, but the explanation I've heard is that that one of the engines cut off because the pressure was lost, which is what Elon Musk said, that the pressure had been lost in the header tanks. So one of the engines cut off, and the other engine meant that it was, instead of getting fuel, it was just really getting more oxygen than anything else, which means that it was running oxygen rich and starting to eat the inside of the engine. So they call it an engine rich mix, where the copper in the engine is basically burning in with the fuel, and that's what that bright green light was. Does that sound feasible to you?
I don't know. I cannot look. I have my ideas, but it would be a little bit of speculation on my side, and I'm not in a position to say.
I'm allowed to be speculative, though.
But you are allowed to speculate away. One of the things that Elon Musk, right after the explosion, he tweets on how happy he is that he got all the data, and he declares the test as success. And I think this is what's important to mention is these are tests and things fail. But why do we test? To get data so that when we do the real thing, the real flight, we nailed it down. And this is how we learn. So testing is learning. And if your test is all perfect, probably you didn't test hard enough. So, and it's really, really great how he manages the expectations on this. He said there was like 1 in 3 chances that they would stick the landing. And already that sets your expectations from the beginning, okay? I remember for Falcon Heavy, I think he made a statement, something like he was expecting a 50-50 chance of success on the first Falcon Heavy flight, and that he would be just happy if it didn't blow up the launch base.
Yeah.
So then imagine when Falcon Heavy was actually successful, it's even... It feels even like more, because you knew from the first moment how low the probabilities are. So I commend on the way that he can manage the expectations of the public. He's really good at that.
Yeah, in actual fact, Falcon Heavy, of course, wasn't completely successful because they didn't recover that central core, and it almost suffered from the same problem.
But this is where you define success before you actually do it. So if he says my success is to put the Tesla in orbit to Mars, and they achieve that is success. Think of all the Falcon launches in which they managed to put the payload in orbit and then they didn't stick the landing. You still consider that launch a success. You define success before you take the action, and then you evaluate if you were successful or not.
This was definitely a success, because you can see Musk next day wandering around the wreckage, which is fantastic pictures. He looks so happy. He genuinely looks like super chuffed, like a kid.
But this is exactly the point. When you were a kid, didn't you blow up things to see how they work?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. And but imagine it. He's like a big kid on the biggest scale, isn't he? Not only has he done that this week, but also that the SpaceX Cargo Dragon launch that went to the International Space Station this week was the 24th successful launch for SpaceX. There's probably 3 more to go, and that will be their, it's already a record. So they've already set a record. So this has been SpaceX's most successful year, like as just a commercial launcher. And so they're absolutely smashing it. They're absolutely smashing it.
Oh, but they are not the new kids on the block anymore. They are a very, very established.
They are the establishment.
Yeah. They have become the establishment. Exactly.
I mean, the fortune's going the other way. If we're looking at Starliner, that did the classic very, very bad news. While everyone's watching Starship, Starliner, they've announced a new launch date, which is 15 months after their first attempt, and that's before they get any crew on there. So this is another uncrewed test of the International Space Station. So that seems to me like pretty disastrous for poor old Boeing.
They had a test, and they have to do the fixes that they need to do, and this takes time. I think it's good that they take the time they need to nail it this next time. It's very important to you test things, but you want to maximize your chances that the test is successful. I'm just contradicting myself when I say that otherwise you don't test hard enough. But you have to test hard enough, but you have to do your best effort to nail it. There is no point to rush it. Okay?
No.
You do your test when you are ready to do it.
You know, but saying that, if I was a taxpayer and I was looking how much money Boeing had received, how much SpaceX had received, the mistakes that Boeing made and the mistakes that SpaceX haven't made when it came to commercial crew. I mean, there's no two ways about it. We need Starliner because you don't want just one.
You don't want just one provider. Yeah.
One provider, yeah. So, I mean, good luck to Boeing that they get it all sorted out. And absolutely, you can't take risks with astronauts' lives.
They are different development styles, okay, and there are different ways to approach the problem. This is also why you go with more than one provider. In case one of them runs into delays, the other, you have less chances that both run into delays at the same time. So this is just part of the business, and eventually you want to have two providers. That's important. You want them to be safe for the astronauts. That's the most important, I would say. So when they are ready, they are ready.
Talking of getting astronauts safe, one of the coolest things that went by this week, which I think probably would have got a bit more notice had there hadn't been so many other things going on, is NASA have named the people that are likely to be the people that are going to be stepping on the moon. Actually, I've got a question for you at the end.
This is for the Artemis team members.
Yeah, the Artemis team members. These are going to be the people. And one of these will be the first woman to ever set foot on the moon, hopefully.
They are, it's a long list. Maybe we can go only through the names.
Okay, so we got Joseph Akbar,
Kayla Barron,
Rajachari,
Matthew Dominic,
Victor Glover. Don't forget he's up for a prize. He's up for our Space Awards.
Warren Hoburg.
Yep, I reckon so. Johnny Kim.
Christina Hammock-Koch.
Kjell Lindgren.
Nicole A. Mann.
Anne McLean.
Jessica Meir. That she actually, we share the same degree. We did both the master's degree in space studies at the International Space University.
Were you in a year? Did you ever meet her?
No. I think she did it like 5 years ahead of me.
Ah.
Yeah.
Ever thought about being an astronaut, Julio?
Yeah, back in the day, when I was younger, I thought I wanted to do that.
What do you mean when you were younger? You're still a child.
I am in my 40s, but when I was very young, I thought I wanted to do it, and then once I started studying everything that can go wrong, let's say that my self-preservation skills took over. But I do still enjoy a few other things like scuba diving. I did a parabolic flight, one of those microgravity flights. That was super, super interesting. I don't think I have what it takes to be an astronaut, to be honest. When you see these are superhumans.
Yeah, well, I mean, every single one of these has got a degree, a master's degree, and virtually all of them have got. Are also
you need a master's
well.
degree or a PhD. You need a self-determination and a work ethic unparalleled to anyone. You need to master languages. You need to be able at the same time to be a leader and be able to follow instructions. It's such a complex set of skills, which actually we go a lot into that during the interview.
Yep. Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's rattle through. So we got Yasmin Mogbelli.
Kate Rubins,
one of my favorite. Frank Rubio.
Scott Tingle, which I remember you mentioned Scott more than once in this show.
Yeah, I think it's because Tingle has to be one of the greatest surnames. It's Tingle. A tingle obviously is like a little sensation that you have, and it's quite nice.
I know what a tingle is, but I just recall you mentioned Scott Tingle more than once in this podcast.
Yeah.
I just don't recall.
We love Scott Tingle. Jessica Watkins
and Stephanie Wilson.
Yeah, who's a veteran of 3 space shuttle flights. So that I guess Stephanie Wilson must be the kind of most veteran out of all that lot.
Yeah, and and this list, of course, is missing that hopefully there will be international astronauts as well in these missions, right?
Yeah, so presumably there will be a bunch of European. How many European?
I would assume
astronauts?
European, Japanese, Canadian. I can only imagine that there has to be from all these different countries.
Yeah.
As for the European ones, I have my personal favorites that I hope they make it to the moon. But I would put my money on at least one French and one German.
Obviously, for me, I want Tim Peake to be the first European to put his foot on the moon. That would be pretty epic, particularly considering we've interviewed him.
But yeah, I have my favorites too.
I'm going to give you a curveball. I'm going to say Samantha Cristoforetti.
It would be certainly very, very interesting to have a first European woman to step on the moon. I think that's interesting. I have my favorites. I think my most, I shouldn't say this, but probably my most favorite astronaut is Matthias Maurer.
Matthias Maurer is your favorite?
Yeah. Well,
he was quite old when he was picked, wasn't he? He's in fact, isn't he the most recent pick?
He's the most recent pick, and he will fly for the first time after Thomas Pesquet on a Dragon. I think he's now training as a backup for Thomas. And I met. Okay, just how Tim is your favorite because he's British. I don't have an astronaut from Argentina, but Matthias studied part of one of his degrees in Argentina. So when I met him and he starts talking to me in perfect Argentinian accent, that's it. He became my immediate favorite.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. He didn't rib. So he didn't rib you about Maradona. Just off air, Julio's been complaining that people, when you meet an Argentinian, try to avoid the going in straight with the Maradona thing. That's my tip for the top. I mean, I must admit, after Like a Virgin, I don't think he released anything that was particularly good anyway. Silly joke that was. We can't delay it anymore. We've got an epic guest, really epic guest. I absolutely adored this interview. I learned so much, and I was so excited to go off and do some caving. That Julio, who's our guest?
So our guest is from ESA, Loredana Bessone. She's the head of analog field testing and exploration training unit at the European Space Agency. What does this mean? She designs and executes the trainings for the astronauts. She can take astronauts to caves for multiple days and put them to the test to see if they have what it takes. She's a colleague of Hervé Stevenin that you interviewed back in episode 69. I tried to guess the episode during the interview. I completely failed. I went to check after. I think I saved episode 40 something.
That's not bad.
Loredana comes from a background in IT, but over her career, she has really moved into this whole area of astronaut training and analog design and preparation of these training courses for astronauts very, very successfully. During the interview, we mostly go into the training program that called CAVES. And what are the odds? What are the odds that the acronym is CAVES for a training that happens in caves?
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Because CAVES is not because it always amazes me. Because actually CAVES does not stand because of the caves. It's actually an acronym that stands for Cooperative Adventure for Valuing and Exercising Human Behavior and Performance Skills. So what were the odds that you end up with an acronym CAVES for a training that with all this meaning for a training that actually happens in a cave?
Acronyms are very much Jamie's favourite. He loved a good acronym, and this is definitely a good acronym. Tell me, is NEMO
NASA Extreme Environment Missions Operations.
There we go. And it's underwater. And Nemo, of course,
Yeah.
feels like it's something from underwater because of
For Captain Nemo, of course.
Captain
yes.
Nemo, yeah. Or the film Nemo, spelt differently.
But come on, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Nemo's named
Nemo
after
from
Captain
Disney
Nemo.
Based, yes.
But I wasn't trying to suggest otherwise.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, yes.
20 by Dory.
I think that Jules Verne was before Disney. I will take that guess.
So do you think the NASA's next sort of underwater analog will be called Dory? Do you know what? I actually wish that everyone could do caves. It seems like such a brilliant way of training people to sort of be cooperative with one another. It's brilliant. It's really, really cool.
We could put the whole world through caves, do you think we would end up with a better planet?
I think, but they should put world leaders. Maybe they should have, before the Brexit negotiations, they should have sent Boris and Angela and Macron into caves altogether so that they learnt how to get on with one another. That would have been brilliant.
Well, I guess in a future interview with Loredana, we can pass that suggestion and see if she can take presidents on top of the astronauts.
That'd be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, presidents, prime ministers.
Luckily, Boris isn't a president. That would be too.
It would have been good during the Cold War.
Would have been. Send down Khrushchev and Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, we can certainly pass that suggestion to Loredana for the next caves. Let's go to the interview.
Let's go to the Akute.
The Interplanetary podcast is alive!
Welcome to the podcast. Can you give us an overview of the major analog projects that you're involved with over at ESA?
Sure. Well, I am directly involved into the Caves and Pangea analog program, which are actually mine. I've been involved also in NASA NEMO. There are various that are being selected for training astronauts in analog environment. The major ones, really, the ones that also the astronauts like more are, because they are more operational, are NEMO, which is a training that astronauts from all space agencies, mostly astronauts from NASA, but also ESA, Canada, and JAXA are invited to, which is an underwater aquarium, which is very similar to a space station underwater. And similarities because it requires astronauts to be living in this underwater station, which is like a space station, and then go out in EVA, in saturation diving, so they cannot really go to the surface. So it's very similar to a space mission. And they do technology testing there. Caves is one that we created in ESA a few years ago, and we take astronauts in caves as a science explorer for a 1 week expedition in a relevant crew. We had astronauts and cosmonauts from all space agencies. This is really unique because no other agencies had all the different space agencies, including Chinese, participating. And this is a scientific exploration into 40 astronauts uncharted territory, where they have to map, perform scientific experiments, and work together as a team with different roles and responsibilities. Pangea is slightly different. Pangea is much more a technical objective or a scientific objective because it prepares astronauts to become like the new Jack Smith Apollo astronauts that will have to go to the moon firstly, but also to Mars in the future, and become explorers, scientific explorers, geologists that will need to discuss with the geologists on the ground and select the best possible samples to return.
The one question that always springs to my mind is that there isn't any kind of solid actual exploration programs on the calendar, as it were. So when you're doing these analogues, is it more to learn about the actual exploring, or is it more about training the actual astronauts that you've actually got at the time to be able to do the exploration? So which way round is it? Or is it both? Or what's it veered towards?
It depends. It depends on the program, first of all. So NEMO was born more as a technology testing program that has less to do with actual astronaut training. But what they did, which was very clever, was they tried implementing ISS-like operations. So they were able to also have astronauts training in performing EVA-like activities during NEMO. CAVES is very different, and CAVES is training astronauts as behavioral teams. The real objective is training them to be very effective and safe teams in very risky environments. So that was born with totally different objectives. However, in order to make it very realistic, we also included a very real scientific program, and it's real exploration, because they have to go into uncharted areas. They have to create the chart. They have to document the system. So they are really learning how to explore, something that they usually don't do. For Pangea, we, for example, have a parallel program, which is called the Pangea Extension, where we do also operational, scientific, and technological testing. So we are also doing it, but Pangea has a main focus, training astronauts to become geologists. So each one of them has different objectives, and due to the characteristics of the analog, does best one of the or the other of the elements of this different covers one of the different aspects.
I was wondering how a little bit of the history of these analog types of training. How do they originate? Why do we do them? What is the connection between these analog trainings that you lead and the big view of, let's start with European space exploration? And then how does this also connect to things like the Gateway, for instance?
The original reason why these programs were created, I am thinking about NOLS, which is a different one that NASA has, is that if you want, in the past, the Russians had the Mir space station, the Americans had the shuttle, and the shuttle was a very short-term flight. The Russians were running long-term flights, but they had crews and backup crews that were formed for years. So these people knew each other, spoke the same language, had the same culture, created a common culture. And if one could not fly, they would replace the crew. So these people were really prepared to work together for a long time. Then there was the NASA Mir program. And the NASA Mir program suddenly put some NASA astronauts on space. And if you think about the experience of Taggart, that was an awful experience. This guy went up for 3 months. He didn't speak the language. He was isolated. He couldn't speak with his peers. And he hated the whole experience. There was a different approach by Shannon Lucid, because when she went, she actually learned Russian. They had already made a very good scientific program for her, and she could already speak with her peers. So there was a totally different setup. But they realized, damn, it's not so easy. So you need to form the crew. You need to enable them to work together. And the cultural difference is you need to actually try to to smooth the different angles. And you need to address things that, they're astronauts, they are good, but still, they will need to actually work effectively together. So originally, these programs were formed as behavioral training programs. And it's not easy to find an environment that is suitable to do this, because usually you either have to stay a long time in isolation, or you have to modulate the stress in such a way that even people that are usually, like astronauts, very operational and resilient, are still feeling humbled by the environment and feel the alien environment and need to actually be confronted with stresses that in 5-6 days become unbearable unless you're really, really good at handling it as a team.
I was wondering, when you mentioned the experience between the Americans and the Russians, do our astronauts have some advantage by being European, being constantly exposed to an international environment, in particular here at ESA? Do they have an advantage compared to, let's say, other astronauts?
Well, obviously, you have an advantage by being exposed to more cultures naturally, because you always have to work in a different language than your own. And you have to adapt to being part of a community, which is the ESA community, which is formed by 20 plus nationalities. So that obviously is an advantage, but it's also an advantage being in Europe, because Very recently, we have the same money, but we've had different money. We have different governments. We have different languages. We have also very different cultures. And there is one more thing, that obviously we are not NASA and we are not Russia. We don't have the same space history, so we are much more humble. And that is definitely a good factor. However, on the other side, you have Europeans that, being the astronaut representing one country, are not humble at all because they are heroes in their countries. While at NASA, astronauts are many, same in Russia. So they're humbled by the fact they are not any more heroes, or not at the same level, if you want, or don't have the same level of leverage on their own government, if you want. So there are different aspects that play in there. But usually, in any case, all astronauts have shared the fact that they have been selected from a very large number of possible candidates, that they're exposed to a lot of opportunities for learning. They're exposed to a lot of opportunities for testing their own operational resilience. So I think they're forming a special culture within their own extended team of international astronauts that leverages all those into a much more astronaut belonging culture, I believe.
That actually leads on to one of my questions, which was about that obviously all these astronauts taking part in these analogues, particularly caves, it's a long time after their selection. So when they go into these programs, presumably you're not sort of testing them further about their suitability to be astronauts. This is really just about training, or is there a time where actually it reveals certain things that weren't picked up in astronaut selection and actually might put that astronaut at risk of being deselected, if you see what I mean?
CAVES is a training program. So I refuse to report anything about what happens in CAVES because it needs to be a really open opportunities for everybody to make mistakes, because you learn a lot from mistakes. It's very valuable to expose yourself to bringing your own experiences to the limit, trying to understand where you are more resilient, why you are more resilient, and being able to also test different styles of leadership or communication. So CAVES is not at all an assessment or selection, but it offers an opportunity for the crew to assess themselves, to reflect on themselves. And I force that reflection on the teams because I want them to learn from each other. I want to learn from themselves, but also from each other, because some of the participants also have already flown before, and they bring a lot into the briefings about what are the similarities, what are the learning that they can transfer into their spaceflight experience, that they learn into this specific experience of being at CAVES.
So does that actually, do you generate kind of management techniques on the fly so that these like highly capable individuals will come up with ways of coping and ways of doing things? Do you actually get spin-off from that element of it, where it's things that as someone like me, for example, could read about it and say, wow, that's a really good management technique, or that's a really good way of handling those type of situations? Is there that type of spin-off?
Actually, CAVES is built based on a competency model that I pushed a lot and we developed internationally. And it's based on non-technical skills, which are derived also from the aviation industry, from operational environments. So the competency model is based on communication, on leadership, decision-making, problem solving, cross-cultural sensitivity, self-care, self-management. So there is a series of competencies, and I actually built a previous program that is a behavioral training program where I trained all the European astronauts on, and this is the basis. So they can test those techniques in the real environment in CAVES, but in CAVES I'm not training them on that. I reinforce them because there are some specific. I translate the non-technical skills into technical skills. For example, the fact that when you are getting onto a rope, you have to actually announce what you're doing. Like you're saying, like, okay, I'm going to come up now. This is called in non-technical skills communicating intentions before taking actions, because you're allowing the person that follows you or precedes you to actually prepare and do something which is in sync with what you're doing rather than against it. It's the same thing that when you're putting the indicator light in your car before you're turning, you're indicating that you're announcing your intention before taking action. So all these behavioral skills are translated into specific technical skills in the environment and taught by the technical people in a very, untransparent way, because they don't notice. But this is reinforcing what they already know from previous training. And if they have an issue in one of those behaviors, it will be discussed either in a debriefing, because I force them to have behavioral debriefings every day, or by me directly with them is a feedback that can happen if it's really harsh during the execution operations, or at the end of the course as a peer feedback by the others or by myself.
Loredana, if I read correctly, you are the designer of the CAVES course. So you are involved from day one on this, right?
Not alone, Not alone, because it has a lot of facets and it has a lot of elements. Let's say I'm the mastermind behind it, though. Yes.
I can imagine that behind any of these programs, there are always very important teams, of course. But what was interesting to me was what goes behind the whole designing process for these types of courses. Because I can assume that you are designing this for astronauts, who I can assume they are very demanding customers, if you know what I mean. So what is the level of effort? What goes behind? How does this all happen to design these things?
Okay, there are different things. First of all, I'm also I've been bringing into ESA the instructional training course that forms all instructors. So I also designed pretty much, I gave the overall process of system engineering of training. So we are system engineering training. So there are different phases of the training. You analyze the situation, because training is in fact the shortest distance between where you are and where you need to be, which is knowledge-wise, it's practice-wise, and also behavioral-wise. So you have different aspects of it. And you need to see where people are. So you really look at the audience, where they are, but you also have to analyze their jobs. Where do they need to be? And then you select what needs to be, where they need to be. And then you create what are training objectives. Then you have to group those training objectives into different types of units that then you can implement in the best possible environment or with the best possible methods. And there are different ones. So some could be seminars, could be case studies, could be role plays, could be really immersing them into a specific simulation. So this is the general system engineering that goes behind. But then there is the specific of how do you find the exact environment? And this for case was very complicated, because I was tasked to create a course that would enable astronauts to overcome the cultural difficulties. And when I'm talking culturals, I'm not talking about the national culture, but I'm talking about educational, about organizational. Some are military, some are pilots, some are scientists, some are engineers. So there is a lot of different cultures that need to be mingled in and created into a new culture that also has some methods for taking decision or for leadership or communication, which are accepted and effective by the whole team. So I was tasked to do that, and I started looking around, and I saw that aviation was doing crew resource management, that the military was doing operational type of training in the field, and I tried to put both together. And then we created a course that was a sort of survival course that was preceded by a few seminars that were handled by psychologists and pilots. And then I realized when I did it that it didn't give me what I needed. I needed an environment that was much more creating stress and bringing astronauts to a humble level, and had much more similarity in terms of scientific work, but also team activities and technical activities. And we tried the cave. And when I sent my psychologist into the cave, she said, fantastic environment, try it. So we tried. And when I went in, I saw the environment is correct, but then it was not enough. The environment was just the texture. And on it, you needed to actually build a mission. You needed to build a scientific program. You needed to build the behavioral elements of it. You needed to make sure that there were similarity also in the training. So I did a speleological course. I spent 2 years trying to go through all possible speleological training at different levels, trying to find the right scientists, the right explorers. And then I pulled them together, and then we looked for caves that were enabling us to do those things. And then we started the process, but then we never stop. I mean, we keep actually evolving and changing the environment or the cave or what we teach or what we add or the scientific program to tailor it to make sure that it's refined to really achieve the final objective, which is we need to focus on making sure that these people have something which is very relevant for them and helps them becoming better teams.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because the one thing that's just occurred to me really is that you're training people for a job that you only ever get to do very, very rarely in some ways, the astronaut job. And the one element that's come up a few times, because I've interviewed people who've been on the Mars 500 and things like that, where these long analogues, and I always thought to myself, one of the elements that's always missing, which you would have thought would be the biggest psychological element, is that risk of danger and actual peril. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that seems like that is actually involved with caves.
Absolutely. And this is exactly where I've always been very critical of isolation studies that don't have the element of risk. I've also been training for 10 years the Concordia Antarctic. Concordia is a French Italo-French base in Antarctica, which also has elements of mixed cultures. And winter teams spend 1 year, of which 9 is in complete isolation. So I've been training them also as teams. And there you have the risk, but it changes totally your interaction, your perception of the whole situation. So in case, like in Nemo also, the risk is real, like in space. You make a mistake, you have consequences, and that forces you to think thoroughly about everything you did, technically, scientifically, but also behaviorally, because you need to take care of your whole team in a totally different way. So your perception, of course, there is a consequence also in being closed into an environment where you know that there is a psychological pressure of not giving up, but still, you know you're not going to die. And there is a completely different effect if you know that if you only twist your ankle, you can't go out of a cave by yourself. It will take a few days until you're taken out. And this gives you a completely different perspective about what you can do if they can, because you could even actually hurt yourself such that you cannot even go out. So that is very, very important. So that element, the reality of risk, is making it very acceptable and wanted by the astronauts, because they're usually really protected a lot in their life on Earth. On the other hand, it makes my life very complex because I hate the whole time in which I'm there, hoping it ends soon. I mean, I enjoy it, but at the same time, the moment when everything is finished, including all the logistics where everybody's out of the cave and everything is closed, then I'm very, very happy because every time I could kill people.
It's very interesting that you spend years preparing for one of these missions, and when the mission starts, you want it to be over as soon as possible.
Well, it's not exactly like that, because I enjoy going through it, but I'm always very tense because obviously anybody could hurt themselves in there, and the risk is life.
So how on earth do you persuade all the other space agencies to be involved with it? Because presumably that you have to sort of confront them and say, oh, by the way, your multi-million-dollar asset, your NASA astronaut, we're going to put him in a cave. So how does that work?
I must admit it was not easy at the beginning, because I spent a few years trying to, first of all, from 2004 to 2007, 8, I developed together with the international partners the competency model. And in there, I was also promoting what we were doing. So in 2008, I first announced caves, and everybody was very skeptical about it. Nobody really understood the analogies, or nobody wanted to believe it. And obviously, it was very risky. We proposed it in 2009, and there was nobody wanted to come. And then in 2010, I organized a survival training for the European astronauts. So we skipped the year. And then in 2011, we tried to put the call out again. And the moment when NASA said yes, then all the others said yes too. Like the Canadians and the Japanese, because the Russians would come anyway because risk is normal and they accepted. But NASA sent one very critical astronaut that is known to be hypercritical, Randy Bresnik. I was scared like hell. But he was positive throughout, but when we came out, I had my boss coming in for the debriefing, and he looked at my boss and say and he was a Navy SEAL. So he's a Navy SEAL. So it's like he came to my boss and said, she run a very tight ship. And he went back and said to NASA, this course needs to go, because this is a most fantastic course for us to be prepared, because it tackles all the important things. It has a lot of analogies. Since then, it was gone, because the astronauts they're queuing to participate. I sincerely have a lot of people who want to participate in this course. They would want for me to do it 3 times a year to be able to run it for everybody, because they know it's valuable for them. In the debriefing, they always tell us that this is one of the best, if not the best course they have done to prepare them for space flight. So I think it was difficult. We still have to run a very tight revision of our readiness, because we do training readiness reviews always to prove that we are ready and everything is prepared, and we have to document the whole thing. But by now, we're trusted.
Is there a memorable moment where you've gone, this is absolutely fantastic? And is there a moment where actually you really have been extremely stressed? Does that happen? Or has it just gone along at a kind of medium all along?
Well, let's say that the astronauts don't realize the level of stress we have, because everything needs to run very smoothly. We have to run to the quarter of an hour to make sure that things are running smoothly, because we have to go into different caves. Everything, the logistics have to be prepared. When we prepare the schedule, we also have the personnel preparation schedule. It's an enormous burden to have everything running. So usually we are stressed all throughout to make sure that things happen. The most memorable in terms of positive, I would say always, it's always happened. And this is it's been very fantastic and we didn't plan for it, but every year the astronauts arrived into a fantastic location as the last location the farther place ahead they would go into that year of exploration. And they took a fantastic picture, which is in their memory. It's reminding them of what they have achieved. It's always very memorable, because for some reason they always achieved a fantastic location every year, which is good. I would say that the worst, and this is very sad, we had concluded the course in 2014. And we were helped by a local caving club in bringing out equipment. And in 2014, one of the caving club members, who was also a rescue caver and a very experienced one in that cave, he actually slipped, and he failed to actually attach himself to a safety rope for whatever reason, because they were not used to follow this strict protocol, and he actually died. And this was, we organized the rescue with our team, and it was a very, very sad moment, which could also have been the end of case. However, we had an investigation from the Office of the Investigator General in ESA. They investigated the whole thing, and they realized that we had done everything we could. But then we also changed our the way we work by imposing safety rules also on every single support personnel, no matter how experienced they are. And we stopped involving volunteers because that, we couldn't control their work environment, and we had to. So it was a very, very sad moment, but we learned that safety is a duty, but it's also a right.
Yeah, I can imagine that after every tragedy like this, you learn and you implement changes to try to minimize the risk in the future. Of course, the risk never goes away, right?
The risk, I mean, can only be minimized. You cannot eliminate risk, and it's also one of the elements of caves. We want risk to be there because it is part of the learning.
Talking about risks, Nemo, which is the underwater EVA type of training you described before, has that component of underwater and that risk that you could suffer decompression sickness if you escape at that moment. Then we have caves. Have you guys considered diving while inside a cave? So cave diving, I understand it's one of the riskiest things.
Yes, but it wouldn't make sense because in Nemo, you dive, but you actually are communicating with the others. You're going out for an EVA, you're living underwater. So the component, which is very valuable in Nemo, is that you're living underwater and you have to do a saturation protocol. You have to dive with protocols. And this is sort of making it similar to space. Plus, but you're continuously communicating and you have a lot of teamwork because you live and work with the others. Cave diving, you either go in a very simple environment, but then you cannot really do a lot of science because you are pretty much only focused on your equipment. And then you're on your own because there is a lot of logistics, but you're not talking to people. You're pretty much going around. So the value of caves is the fact that it forces you to work in a team. You continuously have to explore with others. You're continuously confronted with problem solving and decision making as a team, not as an individual. So it wouldn't have the same value for me. Plus, you increase the risk enormously because now you're in an environment where you have both the issues of the equipment failure being something that is very likely, and you have people that are new because still, even if all the astronauts are divers, they are not cave divers. So you would need to train them on cave diving protocols, which is much more complex than the standard diving protocol. You would need to use a third of your tank before you come back. All these protocols you have to. And then in addition to that, you have the fact that usually when you have cave diving, you have people going for rescue mostly to take out dead bodies. And I don't want that, sincerely. Imagine I need to have a rescue team at hand always when I have the astronauts in the cave. But I would have to have the best cave diver rescue in the world out there, which are very few. There are not a lot of cave diving rescue people that would be able to give that. So I think the whole thing would be really impossible to put together. And to me, it also wouldn't make any sense. I think Nemo has its own...
that you have done a lot of thinking on this.
Oh, yes, I have. I tell you, the Japanese were asking me, you've done everything. We have underwater, you have underground. What could we do to have a behavioral training program? And I say, like, sailing. To me, sailing is a natural one that you can still develop because you can live together in a boat for a certain amount of time, and if you do actually some research or some technology verification, you can still go diving. So that would make a lot of sense. That's a totally new one. I know what would work and what wouldn't, by having really done a lot of thinking about what are the environment and the characteristics of what you want to do. But cave diving, really, to me, it would be just a stunt.
Do a lot of the protocols and management things come? You mentioned sailing, and a book I read a long time ago was by Shackleton, and obviously Shackleton, that book's amazing. Less about the sort of survival bit, but more about his management of how he keeps the team together. Do a lot of those sort of the sailor years? Does it have a lot of that sort of permeated into the work that you've done?
Absolutely. And the behavioral training program I was talking about is the elements, and CASE was built as a behavioral training program. All this, what we call soft skills, are permeating everything you do. And when I do my seminars, even for ground control teams or for this Concordia people tell me, like, you know what, I learned something that can help me in everyday life. It's not just about my professional life, because it's true. there are a lot of things that you have been trained to do properly, and you're trained to the limit, and astronauts are trained to the limit. But there is always the unknown. And in the unknown, what really saves your life or would make you be a success factor is the fact that you know how to have very, very effective behaviors. And those behaviors are observable and are trainable. There are methods to improve. And once you have those methods, and once you know how to behave in a certain moment and how to best deal with your team, you have it. It needs to become a habit.
How does that translate across language barriers and things like that? So, because you've got Japanese, Russians, Americans, Europeans, all on these in the caves together, so how do they overcome the language, the necessary language barriers, or is there a common language that they use?
First of all, all astronauts and cosmonauts need to speak English and Russian because their vehicles have commands in English and Russian. So that's already being sorted out during the basic training for me. However, I of course, there are different levels. And when you start talking about behavioral issues, it's not easy. And now I'm going to a different environment. I'm talking about the Concordia, because that for me was much more challenging. With astronauts, it's not as challenging because they are trained on languages. But when I trained the Concordia people, I had people that were technicians, French or Italian, and didn't speak the other language. Sometimes you had the medical doctor or the commander not being able to speak the language of his people. And that caused me a lot of troubles. When I did my seminars, I did them in 3 languages, English, French, and Italian. And I kept translating to make sure that I was addressing everybody and they all understood what the issue was. And sometimes I was even making them doing matrices of who should actually rely on whom to make sure that they could be able to pass messages in an emergency, because that's very important. But for astronauts, it's not such a big deal because they have different levels of English speaking, obviously, but they still have enough to be able to work effectively.
And is that's the same for the Japanese as well? Which I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is the same for everybody because everybody needs to learn English and Russian. I mean, I think the ones that learn Russian worse are the English speaking usually. That's natural because you're not. I mean, you don't need to. Usually, everybody speaks your language.
It's a permanent sense of guilt I have about not learning foreign languages.
So at the end, anyhow, everybody speaks English, and I hear them from time to time going and speaking Russian. When I had the Chinese participating, English was the language because he wouldn't be able to speak Russian. So, but they communicate in English most of their time because that is their natural language. And if they have, I mean, everybody, even the Americans, learn to adjust because, of course, you're used to the fact that you're always dealing with people that are not at your level of language, but they're not stupid. They are just sometimes they don't grasp the subtleties. So you have to sometimes be patient, but that is also part of what they need to learn. If you spend 6 months with somebody else, you better be patient.
Yeah, I mean presumably with languages, there's one thing learning sort of the technical Russian for flying a Soyuz, but there's another when it comes to the sort of almost colloquialisms of stress and anger and all those kind of words that might come in at that point. So how do you deal with things like that?
I think that there is one thing that what I was mentioning before, the Russians, when they prepared their crews, they were making sure that they were spending a lot of free time together. That is a clue too, because if you know somebody and if you know them well, you actually don't even need the language because there are some keywords that will just everybody in that team will understand. So sometimes, for example, in 2011, they decided that their motto had included a snake. So I kept hearing them speaking about a snake. I didn't know what it was, but they created that as a team. So their team knew what it meant because they had a running joke throughout. And this is a special language. And I think these exercises allowed the teams to create that special language where by just looking at each other or saying that special word, everybody will understand and only that team will understand.
So that's what you meant by the culture that they're creating internally, yeah.
Exactly. It's a specific culture of that team, but it's also a culture that goes across the astronaut corps, because they do share a lot with each other, and they do spend free time with each other. And by those occasions, they actually create an opportunity to actually create this sort of culture. In case they also created with the explorers, and this is fantastic. This is fantastic because after they go out for caves, they become Facebook friends. They start planning expeditions together, and this is also a sort of like it's an effect that is created that is pretty much not planned, but very, very efficient, but very, very nice to see too.
Yeah, so there must be like memes sort of that come out of these cave expeditions that sort of almost spread like viruses amongst the astronaut community.
Yeah, it's so 3 of the astronauts, cosmonauts in space, 2 cosmonauts and 1 astronaut, are actually were in caves before, and it's funny that sometimes when they are in space, I receive like photos of people being together and say, we're here, they talk about that. But most of the memes that they actually create are like related to the activities that they do together, and that will relate to each other and learning from past experiences.
I have the impression that caves was originated in a sort of ISS related era as support to ISS training. Pangea seems to be more geared, although I see that they are not the same. Obviously, they are not the same thing. They are clearly different. But was Pangea thought more? It's about geology, so thought more about concrete planetary exploration with concrete plans for planetary exploration. Obviously, caves, I think some of the aspects of it, or most of the aspects of it, will also translate to actual planetary exploration, right?
Correct. Also because at some point, also lunar caves will have to be explored. But it's less direct, if you want. Caves really was built in terms of as a behavioral training program that used the environment and the mission just as a sort of like environment to be able to then be conductive of what I wanted to do, that was the behavioral training. But in Caves, one thing that we learned, which is it's very easy. We're very good at training astronauts at doing tasks, but in Caves, we still taught them to do sampling and to find the right spot for sampling. And that is not easy because astronauts need to become scientists. It's very easy to perform a mechanical task of collecting rocks. But where do you look for the best rocks? Or where do you look for the best possible microbiological samples? That is something where you need education, not training. So you need to be formed as a scientist in the field. And this is something which made me reflect on the need to actually create that level of expertise for geological and geomicrobiological sampling on other planets. And that I took the occasion that in the last basic training, we had missed geological training to try to propose that instead of just doing an introductory geological training, we actually created a geological field training exercise for planetary purposes in order to prepare the future lunar explorers. And I must admit that I had a lot of resistance from my management. However, then Artemis came out and we were just there on time.
Well, spot of good news. So they're out there doing science experiments. So you've got to keep them busy down in the caves. Have they actually ever made any actual discoveries while they're down there?
Oh yes. There are minor discoveries always, but a major one was 2 major ones were in 2012 and 2013 when they discovered a new species for science and a new species for the cave. And this is fantastic. So it's like they are totally inexperienced people, and it was even difficult. In fact, it's very funny because it's difficult to train them on where to look and what to look for. But since I'm participating every year, in 2014 we had 2 pilots that were decided to assign themselves as scientists. And it was so difficult for them to find bugs, but I would spot them easily. So from time to time, I would just turn around and say, bug, and they would just look at me and say like, did you actually put it there? And I was like, no, seriously, it's obvious. There is water. And I was trying to explain to them, like, look at the environment and say like, I can look at the environment forever, but I would never see it. So we had a lot of fun in that because they kept thinking that I had the bugs in a vial and I would put them for them. But I mean, we have years when we have scientists but in 2012, actually, the new species that is called, by the way, Alpioniscus I don't remember, but it has the name was chosen because it was selected by an astronaut, but it was actually found by an engineer.
Oh, wow.
Not by a scientist. Yeah, absolutely. So it was there. It's very nice. So we have a scientific publication that took forever because in addition to being a new species, there were different subspecies in all the various little bugs that they found. So they had to actually use DNA to be able to identify that there were multiple subspecies because morphologically they were identical, but DNA said that there were multiple subspecies. So it was very interesting for science.
Wow. Was there a kind of disbelief when they first found it? Like, no, you're just not seeing it properly.
Well, when they find it, they don't know because it takes a lot of time afterwards for the scientists to look at. So when the scientists saw it, they were very surprised because that type of animal, in fact, it's used to be in water, came out of water, and now the species they found went back to water. So it went through a cycle of really evolutionary cycle. So it was very interesting from that perspective. So that's why originally the scientists, when they saw it, were a little bit surprised and they didn't capture the fact that it was a new species immediately. But at the end, they found it afterwards. But we always keep the teams informed of what the previous team has found that is interesting, because the realism of the science that we do in caves is important for participants, but also for the scientists, because we want the scientists to keep working with us and making a meaningful program, because we want the astronauts to be interested in keeping doing it.
I'm looking at the species now. It's a bug, and the name is Alpioniscus sideralis.
Sideralis,
yes, comes from
absolutely.
Space.
Does it go down as a team discovery or a individual discovery?
No, it goes as a team discovery. I mean, we know who has picked it up because we have different roles that are assigned by the team during caves, and this is very important. The role assignment plays a big role in the organization of the behavioral part of the course. But it goes as a team discovery. Nothing at caves is individual.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you have to have that, as you were talking about the scientific mind. If I look at this, I just see a bug. How in the world would I know that it's an undiscovered species? So if you're one of these pilots, I can understand their situation there.
We actually prepared the biological sampling program by giving them cue cards of if they find something similar to that, if they have to sample, how they have to sample, if they have to just count them. So we give quite good instructions on that. So the scientists who prepared were looking for specific types of animals that were aquatic animals at the time. So they had guidance on what to look for. But they also know if they find something that is not in the map that they have, because the scientists that prepared with us know quite a lot the fauna in those caves. So they also know that it needs to look more or less like that. If it doesn't, they know it's possibly a new species. So there has been excitement also last year because they had to find something that they thought could be a new species. It's still under investigation, but we think it's just a new species for the cave.
Do you get an opportunity to try out prototype stuff as well in any of the programs that you're running? I'm thinking of things like tools and various other things. Do you get given the prototypes and say, "Oh, can you check these out whether they work or not?"
Okay, we do that specifically when we do Pangea X, for example. This is a specific program for testing protocols and tools for planetary exploration. But we have developed for Pangea a tool which is called the Electronic Field Book, which is a It's a tablet that also has a network, which is a safety tolerant network. It has also optical devices. It has analytical tools outside. It's a suite that supports them in the exploration, because it's also integrating the 3D map of the cave and allows them to pinpoint and to collect science, even science data through this one, and then communicate with ground. So we have developed it and they test it, but it's not for them to test, it's for them to be more efficient. So we get a lot of feedback, and they give us feedback because they believe this is a good tool for them to even think about how to use this in future exploration. But our purpose is just to make their life easier and more efficient, because we don't want them to spend a lot of time typing or writing things. The objective for them is to do science, to document what they do, but not to have pain doing that. So we develop tools just to make them their life easy.
So have any of the astronauts called that their tricorder yet?
Yes. Last year, in fact, we had them at CASE. We had them use the electronic field book, and they all say like, okay, for the tricorder, please also do. I have it in my debriefing. Absolutely, they did call it tricorder last year.
Yeah, I mean it does seem like a surprisingly similar device.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes.
I understand the last caves was performed in 2019, and I read now on the ESA website that the next one will be in 2021. And I was wondering if there is any interesting anecdote from the last edition or some advanced scoop or planning on the next one. What will be special about it? And especially, I would like to know the impact, of course, of COVID-19 and all these activities.
And in fact, we didn't do it this year. We had planned this year to do Pangaea first. Sometimes we do alternate years, Pangaea and Caves. They're very heavy programs, so doing them both in the same year is very heavy for us, because it's the same team that organizes both, and sometimes they have to be in the same period which is June, July to September, and then a portion can be done in November because it's in Lanzarote for Pangaea. But yes, COVID stopped us because we couldn't have participants because nobody was allowed to fly at the time, obviously. So we plan to do the next one in 2021. We have this year, we have not done Pangaea, but we have done a dry run in which we tested also COVID protocols that we would have to implement. It's like a bubble, obviously, that you have to create around the team, but for Caves, it's much more complicated because we have a large support team, and it's not easy to implement that bubble. So we still have quite a challenge ahead. So I'm really hopeful for the to have vaccinations, because I think that is the only way that we'll really be able to implement those courses in the future without having a very, very heavy load on logistics, obviously. In terms of well, first of all, I can't tell a lot about what is happening in Caves because since it's a behavioral training program, I am signing a confidentiality statement that I will not tell what's happening, because I want people, as I say, to experience. And we had actually people coming in and facing some of their of issues like being afraid of heights. Seriously. And I mean, being afraid of heights is not good in Caves, and it helps you if you're doing it in a controlled way, or being sort of not sure of doing EVAs because they have been in space, but they were not confronting doing EVAs. And they were told by the others that if they have done it in Caves, they can do an EVA because it's actually the same thing. So there are things like that. But I mean, yeah, okay, there is... some years ago, we had the first year, not last year, but the first year. I had taken Team Peak before we did the course to do a dry run to also check what he thought about it. And Tim is a very, very organized person. He loves to be on time. And I was discussing with him a few tricks that I wanted to put in, and they say like, you know what? I decided because you lose the sense of time when you're in a cave. You don't know which time it is. You're waking up at 3:00 at night. You don't know which time it is. So at the end, I said, I will not allow people to have a watch. And but then I changed my mind because he participated to the course in 2011. And at the time, I realized that I wanted for them to implement a timeline. So I needed for them to have a watch. I gave them all a watch, but he left his own outside. And then he was always late and he couldn't wake up in the morning and he hated me. He hated me, like Ellie said, you told me that you wouldn't do it. And everybody else picked on him throughout that, poor Tim. But okay, there are things like that happen all the time, obviously. Small things happen all the time. But mostly, actually, they are having fun. But I don't participate to that level of fun because I don't want to. I need to be allowing them to run their own life. And I always intervene to make sure that I modulate the stress and I assure that they are always having enough difficulties, but not too many, to be able to take the learning without being overwhelmed by that.
You're always on the field with them. Obviously, you give them this space.
I am on the field with them, but we have the support team. There is a support team for safety also, but we're having a separate campsite. We are always going with them at a distance, other than in the difficult passages where they need we need to make sure that they are secured. And then I join them when they have to take decisions because I need to make sure that they do it properly and they take everything into account. So we have some moments like the mission reporting that they do, where I'm always aware of them talking to the ground team in making sure that I inject enough issues for them, but not too many, or that the issues are properly resolved, because if you're outside from the cave, you don't always understand what's going on. So I need to modulate that, but it needs to be unintrusive so they don't realize how much I actually interfere with them usually.
Have you thought about making a virtual version of this? Because this would, I'm sitting here thinking, I so want to do it. And I'm thinking, obviously, I'm not going to be an astronaut anytime soon. So have you ever thought about doing a virtual version or a sort of gamified version? Because it sounds absolutely amazing.
It is amazing, but I think there is, we talked about the realism before, and I think you can't really replicate that. Of course, you can actually have a game, but it's still a game. I use a game. I use a simulator for the course that I do, because I used to do, now it's a couple of years that I stopped doing it, but I used to run behavioral training programs for ground control team for astronauts and for Concordia people. And I use a computer simulation, which it's very effective because to me, it's fantastic. And I use in all training because it allows you to really teach somebody a method of communication or decisional situational awareness, and then you can test it with that computer simulation, which is simulating you being ground control team for a very weird space station. But it's very well designed, and you need to design it very, very well to be able for it to be effective. So every little bit of it needs to be tested. But for caves, I think the good part of it is the fact that it's real.
And within this reality, you spent 6 days inside this cave, right?
And nights, yes.
What went and nights? You are obviously sleeping in the cave. Mm-hmm. What went behind the choice of the 6 days? Why not longer? Why not shorter? There must be significance to that.
Yes,
right?
It is significant because very rarely speleologists actually that are not real explorers spend nights in caves. They might go for a day or for a prolonged day. When we tested it the first time, we had 5 days and we went in and out twice. And I thought that going in and out was very disturbing because you need this isolation, this feeling of isolation. When we go into the cave, we have chosen caves that bring you far away enough from the entrance to make you feel you're really isolated. This you realize that it takes you hours to go back, and if you have a problem, it takes days. So that feeling is very important. So we chose caves that bring you at the campsite far away enough. But then I want them to stay inside. And the first year we did it 5 days, and when people came out, they were still not done, meaning that they were fresh enough, they could have gone farther. The next year I decided to add 1 day, and then they were ready to go. I realized that they were tired, mentally and physically tired. And same myself, because it's really the limit. And I didn't measure it in other ways other than in that cave, with the type of activity we do, with that group, with the fact that it's new, because for people that are not new to that, the level of stress is different. I mean, if you think you're a diver, if you're I don't know if, I mean, I used to be a diving instructor. So when you bring a person into open dive for the first time, they're almost stupid. I mean, they lose the ability to really take care of everything because you have so many sensations. Same thing happened in space.
Yes.
Okay. Same thing.
Yes, I remember my first dive was a completely sensory overload.
Absolutely.
Even on my first microgravity flight,
absolutely. Yes.
It was my brain, my body did not know how to handle it.
Yes.
It took some time to adapt.
You have an overload of sensations that your body is not able to process because you give attention to all of them. While if you're used to it, you start giving attention only to the important ones, and you remove things like the clock ticking, because there are things that they don't bother you anymore, but you are not able to distinguish. So this overload, if you go for caves exploration, lasts all the time if you're a novel person. So it will go away if you go for a second time for another 6 days, because you already know what to take, what to eat, how to sleep. I mean, if you know all that, the level of stress is modulated by your body by being able to absorb and interpret a lot of those things and be prepared. But I have this advantage of taking people in caves that have never been to caves before. So this is an overload, continuous overload. So therefore, when I'm stress modulating, I need to make sure that they never go beyond. So if they decide not to go ahead and do an exploration, then me and the rest of the support team, we would just go and say, like, why don't they go? I need to allow them because there is this overload, and 6 days is pretty much the amount of time that I realize allows them to still go out in safety, still wanting to do a little bit, but already wanted to get out.
So doesn't that worry you when it comes to something like a Mars mission, where after 6 days you've still got another 300 to go before you can leave and come back? It
depends. I mean, it's also depending on. It depends on how you plan your EVAs, because again, we're going in EVA every day for 8 hours. So you're constantly needing to, you spend time in the evening having to take care of your equipment, preparing the experiment for the next day, looking at the timeline, communicating with ground, talking to your peers. You never have a moment of rest. In ISS, you never go out in EVA every day. If you go for a Mars mission, usually it's planned that you never go out in EVA for 2 subsequent days because they are very, very heavy. So if you do a long-term mission, you modulate how much work you do. There is a difference between, in the shuttle, they had like shifts, the blue shift and the red shift. They always worked. In Mir and in ISS, they work during normal working hours, but they have a few hours free in the evening and on the morning, and you have your weekends free because it's important. So you modulate the amount of workload depending on what you need to do. For me, the modulation is I hammer them for 6 days because I want that to be hammered, because I need efficiency in the course. I cannot keep them there for 14 days because it would also it would also cost much more of their time. For me, I can modulate it, and with the level of activities that I give them, with the amount of time that they spend in EVA and with the amount of work that I distribute in the team, if there are 6 people or 5 people, I can actually achieve that in 6 days. So there is a lot of thinking going in there, obviously.
I don't know whether I'm being silly here, but is the reason why we have a 7-day week actually to do with this whole idea that really as humans, we need to have these kind of pauses in between? I didn't actually think of it before. I don't know if either of you know the answer.
I can't. I mean, I didn't plan the 7 days week actually, but I know that it depends on what you're doing. It depends on a lot of elements. It depends also on how new you are to the environment. Obviously, we're not new to the environment we're living in, but there are a lot of elements that play with it. But you have to be very attentive because your team needs to still be safe enough on doing what they do. And that's why, for me, it's now 6 days. 5, it's too little. 7 would be too much. with the current conditions.
A quick one, which I was told I needed to ask you about, was when you gave EVA training in front of Buzz Aldrin.
Well, actually, not EVA training, but some years ago I was asked by C-Space. It's an association to which actually here there is somebody who's part of it currently, right? Julio?
Oh, yes.
But I was invited.
That would be me,
yes, I was invited to give a presentation. And I think Julio can tell much more about this association. I mean, I was invited to give a presentation. I had the opportunity to travel with them to Malta, and community. It was fantastic. I could do diving with them, but I gave them a choice of what I could present, because at the time I was involved in the human Mars mission studies for ESA, and they decided that they wanted me to give them a presentation of the work that we have done in ESA, because we prepared an EVA pre-familiarization training program with the ESA Neutral Buoyancy Facility. And while doing that, we actually worked with NASA and Aerospace, and my colleague and myself, we were going into the suit, the EVA suit. We trained in the Neutral Buoyancy Facility for NASA. And then when I came back, I decided that I wanted to try and explain somebody how to move without fighting the suit. That was a whole very strange concept. So they said that they were interested in me explaining that. So how I came out to that. But in giving this presentation, I didn't think about who was there. So I prepared a presentation. And then when I came there, suddenly I had Buzz Aldrin and Scott Carpenter in my presentation. And I was like, damn, I'm giving a presentation about training on EVAs with somebody who's been on a lunar and on a microgravity EVA. And I was like, what am I doing here? Still, it went very well, and I actually had them even at the end. Buzz asked some questions that were actually interesting, but then it was funny because I tried to explain to everybody that doing an EVA with the pressurized gloves means that you have to pretty much like squeeze balls for 8 hours, and there was a total laughter in the room. And then for 15 minutes, I couldn't say anything because everybody thought that EVAs were squeezing balls. So it's like but Buzz actually concurred on what I was saying, that it was really realistic the way I was explaining it. But it was really I felt very, very embarrassed. On the other hand, I mean, it went well, so I was happy at the end that I did it too. That's another thing that I was very happy that I was over with it.
Amazing.
By the way, for our listeners, you just mentioned Hervé. And Matt did a brilliant interview with him a long time ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Where we go and he goes in details on all this EVA training and buoyancy facility at ESA. So those that want to go back into the archive, I highly recommend it.
Nice. Good work. Good work, Julio.
I think I even think it's episode 48.
Wow.
I'm not even sure.
Wow, what a good memory.
If you could bring back a hero from the past to sort of look at your work and to see what you are doing, who would it be?
If I have to bring back somebody from the past, I would say Alfonso Vinci. Alfonso Vinci is an explorer that I read a book about his biography a couple of years ago that is called Living as If You Were Eternal. And it's he actually was an explorer, a mountaineer, but an explorer spent a lot of years in South America. Spent a lot of years with local people. A real explorer, somebody that had the real feeling of exploration because he went to learn with a lot of curiosity. He wanted to learn from nature and from people that really lived in nature. And he went through amazing adventures. It was able to live with people that usually would kill anybody that would go close to them. But I mean, it's to me, he was a fantastic person who never had a house, because for him, everywhere was his house. So I mean, yes, I would want to talk to him. I would want for him to give me some hints on how to create explorers, because I think he was a real explorer.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I might seek out that book. Sounds brilliant. I love it. I love exploration books.
It might be only Italian, but yeah.
Loredana, to conclude, and thank you for your time. We have our final question to our guests is always, what is your favorite space song? Loredana, however, when I was thinking about this question, I was wondering what's the relationship between music and caves. Do you guys take music with you?
Interesting. We had 1 year. We had one team bringing in an iPad, and they were running music on it, and it was obscene, because a cave is in caves there are no noises. You pretty much have a silence, other than sometimes you have some drops or some very far away noises. And this is amazing. I mean, when I go to caves, every year that I go to caves, I forget that there is an outside world. Totally forget. Lately, since we have implemented some mission support, we also had to have internet in the cave. And I hate it, because it allows me to see that there is an outside world. But usually it's fantastic to totally cut. And the silence is a big part of it. Actually, I always seek trying to be alone, far away from the lights of the others, because it's a fantastic feeling of not hearing anything, not seeing anything. You really feel like, and the darkness is amazing. It's not the darkness that you see at night. It's a complete, total darkness. It's black. You open your eyes, you stay with your eye opens, and you see nothing. So if at night you forget to bring your light with you, close to you, you don't get up. You don't move, because you could actually be in danger. So that feeling of silence, I think it's a fantastic music to me. And I hated the moment when there was other music, because I think it's a lost opportunity.
Yeah, I can imagine if anyone is playing music, we have a sound engineer here in the call, but it's probably bouncing everywhere, and you just hear it everywhere, right?
So if I have to talk about a song, I wouldn't talk about a space song. I would really say The Sound of Silence.
One of my faves. It's definitely going on the playlist.
Of course, I could have said Fly Me to the Moon, but at the moment, I mean, you inspire me, and I think The Sound of Silence is really what probably is a good theme for this podcast.
Yeah, they're funny, aren't they? Caves, because you'd expect them to be quite reverberant, but sometimes they're not, are they? They're quite. You make a click and it doesn't come straight back at you. It's quite quiet.
There are few rooms that are very large rooms, but you have to have a very large room to have an echo. Otherwise, the noise is muffled, but it's not really reverberant. So usually you have some sort of reverberation, but it's not a real echo. The first video we did in 2011 has some of it in it at the beginning, where you have people, because it was a very large room, and you have somebody, Brandy Resnick, a comrade, that was calling Thomas Pesquet, and it was actually saying, "Do you?" And Tim and Thomas was talking, saying, "Do you hear me? Speak loud." And so it was like, speak slowly and clearly if you want me to hear you, because when you are very far away, otherwise the reverberation makes your voice not understandable. So you have to speak in a special way if you're distant in a cave. That's for sure. Yeah, but it's not real echo. It's more reverberation. Yes.
Well, it's too chaotic, isn't it? The surfaces that are on there. Yeah.
But the funny thing is, like, I just the other day, I read a paragraph from Tim Peake Limitless book, and he was recalling when he came out of the cave, and say, like, when I came out, it was, and it's the same thing that I have. It's like, for a brief few seconds, just almost a minute, you are overwhelmed by the colors and the smell, because you're coming out of an environment where you're totally, you only smell yourself, and everything is dark, and everything is sort of gray and black, and you come out and the colors, you're sort of like, it looks like a painting. You're overwhelmed by colors and smells. And I just read it the other day, and it's really, really, really a very special experience, because you're able to smell leaves. You're able to smell rocks And you wouldn't believe me if I tell you, but sincerely, come out of a cave after a couple of days and you're able to smell the difference for a very few seconds.
Yeah, that's very similar. I remember with anechoic chambers, when we used to spend time in anechoic chambers, you'd come out and you can really hear the reverberance even of a very, very sort of dead room. It's like, whoa, what's this, all this echo? And you think, yeah, everything has been turned up a notch, hasn't it? So, yeah.
Yes.
And it all goes back to this sensory overload in which at the beginning you capture everything and then your body learns to what to let go and what to focus on, right?
Absolutely. It's fantastic. But when you experience it, suddenly it dawns on you. It's a very particular, very special thing.
I suppose we're all going to go through this once COVID-19 is finally defeated. We'll have that few seconds.
I actually have that now when I watch some movies or TV shows and we're just large gatherings of people and they are touching each other and it's amazing because this is a year ago and you think, what are you guys doing? Stop it.
Oh, yeah.
I think it really will take time to adapt again to that sort of life.
I do,
if we can. I think on that note, Loredana, thank you so much for your generous time today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed awesome. this conversation.
Amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, because I enjoyed it too. I obviously like talking about it, and I liked going and dwelling into the different elements of it. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
The Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
There you go, Julio. That, for me, was one of the most interesting interviews I've done. I genuinely think that that's such an interesting element of astronaut training. I mean, I was amazed that it was so international as well, that the Americans and the Chinese and the Japanese, etc., had all agreed to have their astronauts.
And that now there is a queue forming for astronauts that want to participate in this training. That just speaks of its success.
Yeah.
You know, and ESA is a big organization, and there are lots and lots of people, interesting people to meet. And I wanted to talk to Loredana for a while now. I think the work she does is fascinating. So this was a really great excuse for me to get to know some of my colleagues a little bit better. I come out really motivated and amazed that we are doing this inside the agency. It's really, you know, we are in different countries and sometimes we don't get to see each other. And I learn a lot. And I loved this interview.
Yeah, the bit that I found really cool is the fact that it really is all about going to other realms, isn't it? And what humans will actually need to sort of live on the moon and live on Mars and do all those sort of things. I think it's genuinely an amazing program.
Well, that is the point of these analog trainings, right?
Yeah. But this is I have always said that thing every time I talk to someone from the other analogues is, the one bit that's missing is the danger, but this actually genuinely has some actual danger in it, which I think is really, really cool. But even then, it's not the danger of getting on top of a starship and flying off to Mars. But
it just reminded me, Kathy Sullivan. She, in her book, she talks about, I don't know if you would call it analog training, but when she was training, I think for Hubble deployment, they had to put on the spacesuit and go into a vacuum chamber. I don't know if you would call that analog training. I think you can call it analog training. And there you also have danger because something happens. The room is in vacuum. There is not really that much time to escape from that.
No. And the fact that there's that element of actually doing meaningful work as well, I think is really cool.
I would say most analog trainings, the subject of the test or the subject of training is doing meaningful work.
Yeah, no, you're doing meaningful work in the fact that you're doing the analog, so you can feel as though that's the meaningful work. But there's extra work on top of just the analog itself.
Okay, you mean like the scientific discovery of the...
So actually doing experiments and actually following through a kind of scientific program to keep your mind off the experiment itself. The actual experiment.
Yeah.
It's
okay,
like it's like onions of experiment going on.
But then again, Pangea, as far as I understood, is all about getting these, I don't know, pilots, engineers to start thinking more like a scientist, to start thinking more like a geologist. That was also a very, very interesting part for me of the interview.
Yeah, I mean, if you look through that list of NASA astronauts that they've chosen to go to the moon or part of Artemis, they have either got electrical engineering degrees or, engineering degrees, or they've got geology degrees. That's the two. That seems to be the two ones that you want. You either want
or marine biology as well.
Or biology, and of course there's
but test pilots also always there.
Yeah, but even the test pilots have all got engineering degrees.
Yeah,
I'm going to put some loads of notes for this episode because obviously we need all the notes about caves and Pangea. And everything that we've talked about. I'm going to stick. Where can people go to find these notes, Julio?
Our listeners should go to interplanetary.org.uk.
That's the one. And if you want to get even more involved, you could go, as quite a few people have done this week, I should imagine spurred on by Elon Musk's success, actually. I think there's a space vibe going on, and which is good. That's www.patreon.com/interplanetary, where you can join in the fun on the Discord channel if you want to. It's ever so much fun. We're going to have a party for SN8. I hope you join us, Julio, for the...
And if you...
SN9,
I will certainly be there. I will certainly be there, but I will take the chance now that we are approaching the holidays and people will hopefully be surrounded by family where it's allowed. And at some point they might bring the joy of this podcast to this family, the joy of the interplanetary Christmas. They should go to their podcatcher and under Discover they should search for the Interplanetary podcast, right?
Big time. And you can get it anywhere: YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. It's everywhere.
I use Pocket Casts.
Yeah.
How about you?
Podchaser is quite a good one. Podbean. They're all there. All good. It's all good. It's certainly accessible. You don't need to. But if you're listening to it, you already know this. Although you can obviously tell your friends.
But you need to go and tell your aunt.
Yeah, and your aunt might not have that big a grasp of technology, so you might have to burn a few episodes onto CD.
Don't be so mean on the aunt.
Or put them onto cassette.
My aunt is a nuclear physicist. My aunt could be a nuclear physicist that is very caught up on every mobile device technology. Why not?
Yeah, no, that is true.
Okay.
I was being ageist, like my students are to me.
What have your students done to you?
Well, they just bully me. They bully me, Julio. But that's another story. It's not true.
Okay.
I've got very good students who are very nice to me. That's it. Thanks, Julio, for stepping up again and being the co-host and for getting such a great guest in. I genuinely loved the guest. Brilliant.
Okay, then let's bring more.
Let's get some
more in the future.
Let's get some more. Let's get some more of those. Really, really cool. Particularly considering it's Easter and obviously huge fan of the old ESA for big time. So how are you going to wind down from your busy week?
Well, a good dose of social distancing, mask wearing.
Yeah.
I'm coaching a team of kids rugby.
Oh, wow.
So Saturday mornings I go and coach rugby.
Argentina are good at rugby as well, aren't they?
Yes, I'm glad you bring that up. Yes, we are very, very good at rugby.
Julio, thanks. This is it. Bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Podcast.
Bye.